Live.
All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us during the Lytham Partners Investor Select Conference. My name is Robert Blum, Managing Partner of Lytham Partners, and during this webcast, we welcome Acasti Pharma, ticker symbol of ACST, both on the NASDAQ and on the TSXV, and their CEO, Jen Delvey. Before I turn it over to Jen to go through the presentation, I want to remind everyone that Jen is going to be available for one-on-ones throughout the conference here. If you've not already signed up, you can send me an email. That's Blum, B-L-U-M, at lythampartners.com. Or again, you can visit the website, lythampartners.com/virtual. Click on the one-on-one meeting request button, and we'll look to get you taken care of. So with that, Jan, the floor is yours. Please begin.
Okay, thank you, Robert. And it's really a pleasure to be a part of the Lytham conference again. Eager to tell everyone about Acasti Pharma. Before I get started, I need to mention that I will be making some forward-looking statements today that are subject to certain risk factors. If you need more information on these risk factors, I would direct you to our website, and you can find all of our public disclosures there. So let me get started and tell you about Acasti. We are a specialty pharma company, and we're focused on developing novel drugs for rare and orphan diseases. And what we're doing is we're taking drugs that are already on the market, often in different indications, and reformulating them and repurposing them into these rare and orphan disease indications where there's significant unmet need. And we believe by doing this, we're significantly improving efficacy, reducing side effects, improving safety profile, and improving convenience, both for physicians, caregivers, and the patients themselves. I should mention that all of our drugs in the pipeline right now have received orphan drug designation. This means that we have 7 years of market exclusivity in the US and up to 10 years in Europe. I want to mention, though, that we have very strong patents. So we have a strong IP portfolio that will extend the exclusivity for these drugs well beyond 2036. I want to mention that we're currently pretty well capitalized. We, as of 9/30 last year, our last reporting quarter, we had $35 million of cash on our balance sheet. And this is sufficient capital to really significantly advance our lead program, GTX-104, which I'll tell you more about in a minute, and also to move forward our other two drugs in the clinical pipeline, GTX-102 and 101. So with that, let me jump in and tell you more about our lead program. This is GTX-104, and we're targeting a really devastating condition called subarachnoid hemorrhage. This is bleeding on the brain, and it's caused by an aneurysm that bursts. And, people are walking around with this and they don't know they have it until the vessel actually ruptures and you get this pretty massive bleeding on the brain. It's a really critical condition. 10 to 15% of these patients die before they make it to the hospital and to surgery. And about a third of these patients have pretty poor outcomes. So the key is rushing them into the emergency room, getting the scan to confirm the ruptured aneurysm, getting them in for surgery. And then these patients are immediately put on a drug called nimodipine. Nimodipine is a calcium channel blocker. So what it does is it reduces blood pressure. And preferentially in the brain. There's other calcium channel blockers on the market for more peripheral blood pressure lowering. This one acts on the brain, relaxing those blood vessels and really enhancing blood flow into the area that has been damaged, and to facilitate healing. What has been shown with nimodipine is that patients who stay on this drug throughout their time in the hospital, which can be anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, have better neurological outcomes. So, if you're a patient or you have a loved one who suffers a subarachnoid hemorrhage, you really want them to be on this drug. And in fact, nimodipine is mandated. So the critical care centers that treat these patients, to keep their certification, they must give these patients nimodipine because it's so important to improving their clinical outcomes. About 50,000 patients each year suffer from a subarachnoid hemorrhage that's caused by an aneurysm. So we estimate the market potential in the United States to be about $300 million. And there's an equally nice size market in Europe. And in China, in fact, the market is about threefold that of the United States. So big opportunity there. So the problem that we're addressing is that nimodipine is only available as an oral drug. And the problem with this is that it has to be given, first of all, an oral drug to an unconscious patient. Most of these patients are unconscious, at least in the first few weeks of their care in the ICU. So the capsule has to be pulled apart by the nursing staff, drug siphoned off, and then delivered through a nasogastric tube so the drug gets into the stomach. Depending on whether there's food in the stomach, there can be poor absorption. So this reduces the amount of drug that actually gets into the bloodstream. And what you'll see on the next slide, let me explain this graph. In the turquoise here, these are blood levels in patients who have been given oral nimodipine over a 3-day period. And every 4 hours in the turquoise, you see that the blood levels go up, and correspondingly, the blood pressure is going to go down. And, so then the blood levels go down, they trough over the next, 4-hour period. And then when the drug is given again, you see this increase in blood levels. And what this translates into is really poor control of blood pressure. Remember, every time you get one of these peaks, that's the maximum dose of nimodipine, which means you've got a significant lowering of blood pressure. And this can risk a hypotensive event, which is really serious for these patients. If they get very hypotensive, they typically have to be rushed back in for surgery. In the worst case, they have to have vasopressors injected into the brain to try to get the blood pressure back up. So you want to avoid this sort of thing. And what you see in the orange line here is the average blood levels of nimodipine after being delivered our drug, which is GTX-104, which is an intravenous infusion. So we've figured out a novel proprietary way of reformulating nimodipine so it can be delivered via an IV infusion basically around the clock. So it's a continuous infusion. And what you see in the dark orange line here is very stable blood levels. So the blood pressure is not bouncing around. The patient's blood levels and blood pressure are stabilized, and this is much more conducive to healing. And the dotted lines are really the variability around these doses. So you can see very tight precision around the dosing for GTX-104, whereas these dotted lines for the oral are, really significant. So tremendous amount of variability, even within the same patient, but you see a lot of variability patient to patient. So this is the data that we have now submitted to the FDA, along with a phase 3 protocol. And we're looking for the FDA's feedback and guidance on that protocol. And we would expect to initiate that study in the next couple months. And, in this slide here, I just wanted to emphasize the fact the FDA is only requiring that we show safety. And what that means is that we don't have more frequent or more absolute numbers, hypotensive events as compared to the oral. And when you see this, remember, every time you get one of these peaks with the oral, you're at risk of triggering a hypotensive event. So it just, is logical here that we should see actually fewer hypotensive events as compared to the oral. So really the FDA is saying small study in about 100 patients, 50 in the oral arm, 50 in the GTX 104 arm, comparing safety outcomes with the two ways of administering nimodipine. And again, we're going to collect a lot of extra data because we believe that we're going to be able to show significant improvement in patient care. Not only do we believe that there'll be fewer hypotensive events and better control of blood pressure, which means, you have fewer hypotensive events and less risk of vasospasm, which can be very deadly. But we think it's going to reduce the nursing burden and reduce the risk of medication errors. There's been a lot of mistakes that the nursing staff can make when they're siphoning off a drug and trying to deliver it through a nasogastric tube. And we want to collect, of course, length of stay. All of these things will go into a publication, which we think will help to support the commercialization of this drug. So again, we expect to hear back from the FDA very soon with feedback on our phase 3 protocol. We expect to start that study in Q2, and this study should take about 18 months. So it should wrap up by the end of 2024, and then we would submit our NDA. Because it has orphan status, we would expect to get a rapid review, fast track review. So this product could be on the market in 2025. And as far as commercialization, we think we can do this ourselves. There's only 1,400 neurointensive care units or stroke centers in the United States. And it's the 80-20 rule, actually. 70 to 80% of these patients are seen in only 400 hospitals. And as you can imagine, they're in the biggest, cities in the country. So we can target these centers with as few as 10 to 15 reps initially. And many of the initial adopters, we believe, will be sites that we'll be enrolling in our phase 3 clinical study. We are looking to partnering outside of the United States. We're already in discussions with pharmaceutical companies that have other products they sell into the intensive care unit in Europe and also in Asia. So with that, I'll move on to our second program, GTX 102, and this is targeting a neurodegenerative disorder called ataxia telangiectasia. This is a genetic disorder, so it runs in families, and it affects really young kids. So it's typically diagnosed at the age of 1 to 3. And the parents know something's going on. These kids have difficulty being able to stand. They have difficulty, problems with balance, eye-hand coordination. They have a lot of challenges learning to walk. It also affects speech. They have difficulty, it affects the muscles in the jaw, so they have difficulty speaking, they have difficulty swallowing. It affects their immune system. So these kids are prone to infections and also, unfortunately, to cancers, especially blood cancers and brain cancer. And unfortunately, this is typically what triggers death in these patients, usually in their 20s. These kids are often wheelchair bound by the time they get to be about 8 to 10 years of age. And the important thing here is there's no treatment today. There's no drugs approved for ataxia telangiectasia. There is physical therapy that these kids get. They'll get speech therapy. These things this therapy can help somewhat. It's interesting because a class of drugs called glucocorticosteroids have been given to these kids in the past to treat the cancers. And physicians noticed that the symptoms of ataxia, so this neurodegenerative, coordination symptoms, actually improved when they were on therapy with these glucocorticosteroids. So this led us to look at a trial that was done in Italy. Dr. Zanoli and her team conducted a trial a few years ago in a small cohort of patients, but it was a very well-designed study. And they looked at treating these kids with an oral solution of betamethasone. Betamethasone is a long-acting glucocorticosteroid. It's only available in the United States as an injectable. but there is an oral solution or a syrup that's available in Europe. And Dr. Zanoli used that syrup in this study and found that she saw significant improvement in the various aspects of ataxia symptoms. So it improved posture, balance, gait, eye-hand coordination, and speech. The only aspect that was not improved over the 30-day study was ocular motor. These kids have difficulty focusing. So focusing on an object and being able to follow it with their eyes. Based on this data, our team took betamethasone and we reformulated it into an oral spray. So this is a spray that the child or caregiver would spray on the tongue. It's a concentrated spray, so there isn't a lot of volume, much less volume than the oral solution that's available in Europe. This is important because these kids can't swallow. They have real difficulty. So the oral spray is very convenient, easy for them to administer. Based on early data, we saw very nice blood levels. The dark blue here is our GTX 102 blood levels compared to, in red, the oral syrup that's available in Europe. And you can see we saw much faster onset of action. We reached higher peak blood levels, and over time, very similar exposure as compared to the syrup on the market in Europe. So we have since now completed a phase 1 study. This is a pivotal study that is now going to allow us, on the basis of these results, to move this program directly into phase 3. In this study that we completed and we announced top-line results in December, we looked at 3 different dose levels of GTX 102 and compared it to the injectable, which is only available in the United States, or the only form of betamethasone that's available in the United States, and the oral solution that's available in Europe. And what we saw was really nice, predictable results, very consistent results. As we increased dose, we saw a very predictable increase in blood levels. And we saw, about the same level of exposure, meaning over, a 24-hour period of time, we reached the same levels, blood levels, as the injectable in the United States and the oral solution in Europe. And this is important because, remember, we saw positive clinical results with the oral solution. So we want to try to mimic that dose. And we were able to do that with this study. And we're going to be comparing it to the injectable from a regulatory perspective to get approval under the 505(b)(2) pathway. These were great results. We also showed that there's no difference in how you administer it. The dosing is based on weight. And if you have a very small child, it would be just 1 spray per dose. Larger children might need 2 or 3 sprays. And what we wanted to see is, would there be any difference in absorption if you waited maybe a minute in between sprays? And we saw no difference. So this is very important, again, because again, these kids may need a little bit of time to swallow or try to swallow, absorb the drug before they get a second spray. We saw no adverse events. And again, this is going to move us now directly into phase 3. So we're packaging all of this data, and we should have the full report in the next couple months. We'll send that off to the FDA with our proposed study design for phase 3, and hope to get their comments by the end of this summer. And then we can move directly into phase 3 before the end of the year. I want to mention that this will probably be a very small study. Again, probably less than 100 children would be enrolled in this study. We are also working with a number of the big centers of excellence in the United States. The biggest is Johns Hopkins. And we are hoping that they will be our lead investigator on this phase 3 program. And there's only 12 of these centers in the United States. So, this is a drug that once it's approved, we think we can commercialize this ourselves with just a few salespeople. And frankly, the more important aspect of commercializing this is going to be patient education, working with the various patient advocacy groups. We're already working with the AT Children's Foundation, very important advocate for these families, and they can help us get the word out that there's, a new drug approved for this condition. We think this is very similar to Emflaza. This is a drug that is a reformulated glucocorticosteroid, so different than ours, and targeting Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, which is a neurodegenerative disorder diagnosed in young boys. And the market size is similar. And what you can see here is they had a successful launch in 2017. And in 2022, which we don't show yet, as of Q3 in 2022, they had already reached over 200 million in sales. So we think this is a very good analog for what we're trying to do with AT. So it's an exciting market, and most importantly, we're hoping we can bring a drug to a drug option, treatment option to these families that really have nothing that they can give their children today. So in the few minutes that I have left, let me tell you about our last program, GTX 101. This is targeting a really severe nerve pain condition called post-herpetic neuralgia, or PHN. This nerve pain follows an infection by the shingles virus. What we know is that the current drugs available don't work very well. These patients have horrible pain. They describe it as the worst pain in their lives. It's actually the single largest or highest cause of suicide in patients over the age of 70. Today, basically, these patients are given oral gabapentin. This drug does not work well, but it's cheap, so the payers require that the physician go through gabapentin first. And then if that doesn't work, which in most cases it doesn't, they are able to progress to the lidocaine patch. And the lidocaine patch now has been around for a while. The problem with it is that it's difficult to place. The pain can be anywhere in your body. These virus particles settle into the nerve fibers, and it can be anywhere. And so, you can't always conveniently place a patch. And the patch doesn't stick well. You can only wear it for 12 hours, and then you have to take it off. So patients experience breakthrough pain, and consequently, 40% of patients do not get the pain relief that they really need. And so many of these patients go on to opioids, which has abuse potential and is really a problem in our country. By the way, there's about 130,000 people each year that suffer from post-herpetic neuralgia. That market is valued at about 200 million in the United States. But the patch is being used more broadly beyond PHN, even though it's only approved for PHN. The market potential for the patch exceeds $2 billion. What we're doing is we're taking a common pain analgesic pain med that's only available as an injectable in the United States. It's called bupivacaine, and it's used very commonly in dental surgeries and other outpatient surgeries because it has a very fast onset of action. You see it act almost right away. And then you get this nice long period of sustained pain relief. So this was a great prospect for reformulating into a drug that could be used topically for this chronic pain condition. And so we've reformulated it into a spray, very conveniently applied onto the skin. It's got proprietary excipients in it that drive the drug down into the skin. And actually very little of it gets into the bloodstream, which is very important. You really want it getting into the dermis and not, collecting in the blood where you have any risk of toxicity. And then what is left on the skin evaporates, so you don't get any greasiness or stickiness. And actually this absorbs rather quickly. Within about 10 minutes, a person could take a shower, go swimming, or just go about their daily life. This is non-narcotic, And let me share with you actually, let me go here. We did a clinical study that we just reported results at in December. We looked at 3 dosing levels of GTX-101 and compared it with the injectable form of 101 that's available in the United States. And we wanted to see how the drug was absorbed and, whether it caused any skin sensitivity, which it did not. And you'll see on this slide, a rather wordy slide, that very importantly, what we saw was a really nice sustained, presence of the drug in the tissues up to 18 to 24 hours, depending on the dose. Whereas the injectable hit maximum blood levels in only 23 minutes, and then it goes away. So, this is exactly what we wanted to see. We think this is going to translate into, slow elimination and long duration of effect in the tissues to provide, 24/7 pain relief. This is a once-a-day dosing, by the way. And we saw no side effects, no skin irritation. The only complaint was there was a little numbness, which seems to indicate that the drug was actually working. If I go back to this slide, I mentioned earlier that the patch is only approved for PHN, but it's used in all these other major pain indications: osteoarthritis, back pain, diabetic neuropathy. So we think the potential market for GTX-101 is very large. And we conducted market research recently with 250 physicians. They were very excited about this product concept. Pain really is a huge unmet need, treating pain. They really don't have good options. And 95% of these physicians said they would prescribe GTX-101 preferentially over the patch if we get this drug, approved. So if the trials are successful and the drug gets approved. So that's very exciting. On this one, it's an earlier stage program. We just finished this phase 1 study. We need to move into a phase 1B. It's kind of a dose escalation study. And then we would expect to move into phase 2 next year. So with that, I think I'm pretty much at the end here. I just want to mention, and maybe wrapping things up, that we have some really important milestones coming up with GTX-104, our lead program. Again, we're about to move into phase 3 in the second quarter. Again, this should move forward fairly rapidly. Small study in 100 patients. We think we can have results by the end of 2024 and be on the market in 25. And with 102, it'll be following right behind 104. We would expect to start phase 3 again by the end of this year. And that program will probably take about 24 months. So approval will probably be about a year behind GTX-104. And with 101, this has huge potential. It's a very exciting product, earlier stage. And this one should be able to move into phase 2 by next year. And that, by the way, that milestone should allow us to identify and solidify a partnership with a pharmaceutical company in the United States. This is a drug that we would not market ourselves. It's really a primary care product, and we're going to need a large pharma company to market this for us. So with that, Robert, I'll turn it back to you. I don't know if we have any time left for questions. I think you're on mute.
My apologies. Thank you. Yeah, I think we're right at the end of our time here. So why don't we'll wrap things up. Jan, thank you so much for that overview of the company. Greatly appreciate it. I guess I'll just remind everyone throughout the conference here, if you'd like to arrange a one-on-one with Jan and the company here, and have not done so already, you can reach out to me, again, Blum, BLUM, at lythampartners.com, or again, you can visit our website, lythampartners.com/virtual. Click on that one-on-one meeting request button. We'll look to get you all taken care of. So we hope everyone enjoys the conference here today. Jan, thank you so much for the time. Greatly appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Robert.